talk about reading off, an iPhone. The other situation we've got to think about is what we've been talking about is sending that information back onto the net. And that's, a big distinction we've got to make. We're not only consuming, we've got to be participating as well off a mobile phone. And that's where an iPhone is such a fantastic invention. It really allows that participation.
We have a question 2 rows from the back.
Just wondering if you guys know much about how readers arrive at your sites, whether they go to your site and then search and then look at news, or whether they search specific news stories. And if they do search, if you think search engine optimization has the potential to affect journalistic content.
Yeah, so we have our news sites now typically getting kind of 20-25%, somewhere between 15 and maybe 25% of their traffic from search. Our biggest referral is typically Google or Google News, and bigger newsrooms, including News Digital Media's newsrooms, have specialist SEO people who tell us how we can make our stories show up more and more. We were talking a little bit earlier on about the idea of news portals and using that old word, and we all realise now that it's starting to be less about the brand and the place where you would hoping to bring people naturally every day, and more about mobilising our stories and flinging them out there, whether it's Facebook or so it's one extra thing that journalists are now expected to do is and I always say this, it used to be your story was finished when you filed it. Now as a journalist you've got to be a marketer of your own stories as well, so you need to know what sort of heading is going to get you a better traffic. You need to know sort of techniques to get it out there and to be promoted, and there are some, I guess, concerns down the track about how that might influence the journalism. Certainly, using Google AdWords as an example, if you write stories with certain words on certain topics, they're going to attract more Google AdWords and earn you more money as a publisher than if you didn't. We haven't yet got to the point where we go into morning conference and the news list says you must have, the example I always use is stories on mesothelioma, which is the highest paid ad word. But, if it gets bad enough, maybe it will be on the news list every morning.
Is liar one of those words?
Not yet.
On a story-by-story basis, sometimes you have no control over how well a story does if an external site picks it up because it's of interest to their readers. You can get masses of traffic to it. Alternatively, you do have control over things like posting on sites like FARC. If you want to put weird stuff up there, that can often drive traffic to your site.
It's a big drive.
Now, of course, you come in for a bit of stick, for allegedly dumbing down product that you produce and setting up different silos for different kinds of serious and not so serious news, and obviously the not so serious celebrity stuff tends to spin more wheels. Is that a fair criticism?
I love this topic. I'm listening to Mark before, I don't know if he's still here, in the blogging talking about Fairfax is doing this and News Limited moving into that. The websites are the way they are because the journalists who are editing them edit them in that way. There's never been any strategy at Fairfax or News Limited, I can tell you categorically, to set up their websites as racier or to put more Paris Hilton up. What you're seeing is, the thing you're really seeing is journalists who edit those websites, edit the sites in real time with an incredible amount of information and data coming in. It's like driving a car. You have a dashboard in front of you which literally tells you which stories are getting hit, which are not. And like you would any other media product, you want to put the stories on your front page that you think you're going to get the most traffic. And frankly, I think the lesson is actually more about what is in our newspapers, and I think what the way the data is showing up is how far off the pace our newspapers and our newsprint products have been in the past. And the fact that newspapers are broadening, all of the stuff that's always been in newspapers is still on those sites. The fact that they're broadening into other areas like entertainment is only a good thing, because that will bring in revenue that they didn't have before, which can go to support the types of journalism which are not commercially sustainable by themselves.
And you're obviously running a lot more moving pictures too, and sound bites.
At the Courier Mail, we found that the celebrity stuff might drive the number of page views we get as people go through galleries and that sort of thing. But the actual, if you look at the number of best read stories on the site, they're often hard news ones that people are interested in.
We get very little celebrity stuff come through our site, and that's the only way a story can get onto the Norg if someone chooses to put it on there and get spotted out. So it also works as like an aggregator of news, and it just doesn't come. And you know, I think that's a good sign. I think people still want, you know, good hard news and a place to have a good debate and talk about things.
Absolutely correct, and the beautiful thing about the internet is it's just so segmented. You can, you can go to, the Oz or to blogs that are very specialised and have great, information that is for a certain audience that another website, a mass market popular website like mine, wouldn't specialise in. It's not our job.
Michael? I'm just curious to know what doesn't work online. What really doesn't get the hits? What doesn't attract people?
Most of the most online news editors will have many stories about the editor or an irate journalist bailing them up in the morning, wanting to know where their page one story is and why it's not online. Most of the time it's being moved down because no one's read it. I came up from Sydney today, and the Sydney Morning Herald today has huge tracts of Peter Costello's memoirs, and we were talking about this earlier. It has great puff boxes here telling us that throughout the week we're going to hear all about in great detail about the behind-the-scenes stuff that happened at the federal election last year. I don't think it's a question of what works online and what doesn't. No one will read that. There is acres and acres of market research on what Middle Australia likes, and on and over and over and over it'll come back, things like family and health, and tell me how they're practical ways that I can have a better life. And that's what you're seeing in the United States at the moment with the circulation declines. It's because they've got such a narrow news agenda, and I think the lessons of what is working online are actually more applicable to what doesn't work in newspapers.
Yeah, but also online, some of that information could actually have an audience because, they're very niche audiences for things.
Absolutely.
So, we're talking about mass media, so people give a big, broad general picture. You have very successful, more specific sites on topics that would never get a run in, mainstream papers, but have a dedicated audience online. So I don't know if anything doesn't work online. I think if it's good enough and it's got a good niche, it'll have an audience. It won't be, the audiences we have in mainstream press, which I like to call control media, but it will, have an audience somewhere.
Quite often it's not so much about what they'll read as what they want to sound off about, and if you get contentious issues, particularly political stories, the actual content of the story won't mean as much as the opportunity for them to sound off yet again and espouse their various political views.
So could it be that the carefully managed Costello strategy could backfire spectacularly? Everybody might be over it already.
Middle Australia couldn't care less, not in the least bit interested. And I would say the same thing about the excruciatingly detailed coverage of New South Wales government.